It was just a cup of coffee. $4.85. A regular caramel latte. Nothing fancy. Nothing worth remembering. Unless you were the man who bought it and lost a $300 million company because of it. Downtown Chicago. Early morning. Cold as hell. Elena Rodriguez stood at the register of a crowded cafe on Jackson and Wells, clutching her wallet a little too tightly. Her coat was 2 winters past its prime. Her nails, unpolished. Her eyes, sharp, tired, but unreadable. Card declined, the cashier repeated flatly. Do you have another one? There was no drama in her face. No panic, just a small, controlled breath. She pulled out a second card. Also declined. The line behind her was growing. People shifted. Coughed. Someone let out a quiet chuckle. You know the kind, the judgmental kind. But Elena stayed calm. Stoic. Proud. That's when a voice broke through the awkward silence. I got it. Put her drink on mine. She turned. Bradley Whitmore. Billionaire. Media darling. The man fortune called the king of freight. Crisp navy overcoat. Monogrammed leather gloves. A Rolex Submariner flashed as he casually lifted his phone to pay. The same man who had fired Elena 6 months ago with a smirk and a line she'd never forget. You're smart, Elena. But you're not exactly leadership material. You're more community outreach. And now, he was playing hero in a coffee shop, not even realizing who he was rescuing. $5 isn't gonna bankrupt me, he said with a half laugh. No, Bradley. It wasn't going to bankrupt you, but it was going to cost you. Because exactly 93 days later, you'd sit down at a long glass table, across from a consulting firm you believed was here to save your dying empire. You'd shake hands with their CEO, and that CEO would be Elena Rodriguez, the woman you humiliated, the strategist you dismissed, the very person whose latte you bought, without ever realizing you were funding your own downfall. It wasn't revenge she was after. It was justice. And you, Bradley Whitmore, had just paid the cover charge. 3 years before that quiet morning in the coffee shop, Elena Rodriguez was not someone who needed help paying for a latte. She was a rising star. At just 32, she was the director of strategic growth at Whitmore Logistics, one of the most aggressive and profitable shipping firms in the Midwest. If you ordered it, moved it, tracked it, or needed it across the country in 48 hours, Whitmore had a hand in it. And behind those numbers, behind that growth, was Elena. She wasn't just good at her job, she was brilliant. While others were still presenting recycled charts and bullet points, Elena was building predictive models that forecasted market swings 3 quarters ahead. She brought data and instinct together like a symphony. She didn't just understand the business. She breathed it. She earned her seat at the table the hard way. No Ivy League last name, no executive mentorship, no country club connections. Just relentless discipline, wild intelligence, and a habit of staying 2 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. And that was the problem. Because when a woman like Elena walks into a room full of men like Bradley Whitmore, things get uncomfortable. Not because she lacked competence, but because she had too much of it. Bradley called her feisty in front of clients. He said she had an edge. Once, after she crushed a quarterly review presentation, he leaned over and said, "Fire's good, Elena. Just don't burn the place down." At first, she brushed it off. She told herself the results would speak louder than the whispers. But inside Whitmore, results only spoke if they came from the right mouth. The boardroom Elena walked into each quarter was lined with identical suits and family names that went back 3 generations. She was neither. Then came the proposal. Elena had spent months building a plan to pivot into last-mile delivery, an innovation that could have doubled the company's value in 18 months. Bradley shot it down in front of the entire leadership team. Too risky. Too untested. 6 weeks later, the same plan was announced, word for word, under Bradley's name. No credit. No acknowledgement. And when Elena pushed back, she was pulled into HR and told her style no longer fit the company culture. That same afternoon, her keycard stopped working. Just like that, her career ended with the cold click of a security door lock. She walked out without a single box. No send-off. No severance. No fanfare. But as she stepped onto the Chicago sidewalk that day, she wasn't broken. She was furious. And that kind of fury, the quiet kind, the kind that burns low and steady for years, that's not the kind that fades. That's the kind that builds empires. Losing the job didn't break Elena. It was everything that came after. The silence. The phone that stopped ringing. The colleagues who suddenly weren't available for lunch. The recruiters who ghosted her after one round of interviews. The rent that showed up every month, whether she had a paycheck or not. 1 month turned into 2. Her savings, which had once looked like a small cushion, vanished under medical bills for her mother's treatment and the high cost of simply existing in Chicago. She sold her car, canceled every subscription, switched from name-brand groceries to whatever was on sale. She applied for jobs, hundreds of them. But no one was looking for a woman who had been fired for not being a culture fit. At night, she picked up shifts waiting tables at a 24-hour diner near the airport. During the day, she tutored high school kids in statistics and Excel. Quietly, anonymously. She slept 4 hours a night. 5 if she was lucky. People think rock bottom is loud. Screaming. Tears. But it's not. It's quiet. It's that moment you realize no one's coming to save you, and somehow, you're still expected to keep going. But it was in that silence that something else happened. She started building. Not a resume. Not a job application. A vision. Late at night, when the city had gone quiet, Elena sat at her kitchen table and began sketching a model. Not just for a logistics company, but for an entirely new way of thinking about supply chains. One that used real-time behavioral data to predict demand before it happened. One that used underutilized regional networks to outpace the giants. It was risky, complex, ambitious. In other words, exactly the kind of idea Whitmore never had the courage to greenlight. She called it Rodriguez and Company, not because she wanted her name in lights, but because she wanted every woman, every outsider, every underestimated mind to see it and think, if she can build this from nothing, maybe I can too. She didn't need revenge. She needed results. Every dollar she earned from tutoring went into software tools, cloud storage, and market access subscriptions. Every tip from waiting tables paid for freelance developers. Every moment someone doubted her just added more fuel. 6 months in, she had a working prototype. 8 months in, she had her first client. A small regional distributor desperate to survive after losing a contract to Whitmore. By month 10, she had 5 contracts, 3 part-time staffers, and a war chest of ideas the market hadn't even seen coming. Elena didn't rebuild her life the way others expected. She didn't bounce back. She rose up, with fire in her spine and blueprints in her hands. Because sometimes, the fall isn't the end. Sometimes, it's the start of the real climb. It started with a text message. Just 5 words. I heard what happened. Coffee. The sender was Kenji Lee, former senior data analyst at Whitmore. A quiet genius with a dry sense of humor and a mind like a quantum processor. He'd been let go during a departmental restructure, just 2 months after Elena. Same story. Different target. Too smart. Too different. Too unbothered by corporate politics. They met at a cramped corner cafe in Logan Square. Elena had just finished a tutoring session and smelled faintly of printer ink and cinnamon coffee. Kenji brought his laptop and a plan. I've been following what you're building, he said, no small talk. I want in. Elena blinked. You don't even know what this is yet. He smiled. I know it's going to work. And I know we can move faster than they ever did. You just need the right people. And she did. Over the next 2 weeks, more messages started coming in. Not resumes. Not cover letters. Just simple, quiet notes from people who had been burned, underestimated, or quietly removed from Whitmore for not fitting into the brand. There was Angela Moore, the top sales director in the Northeast region, who had outperformed every target for 3 years straight, until she asked for equal pay. There was Devin Banks, the cybersecurity manager who flagged a data breach weeks before it went public. Instead of a bonus, he got escorted out for causing unnecessary panic. And then Maya Caldwell, the HR specialist who refused to look the other way when executive misconduct surfaced. She'd been replaced by someone less emotional. Each of them brought scars. But more importantly, they brought skills. They didn't wear suits anymore. They met in living rooms, shared ideas over takeout, whiteboard on apartment walls, and built a company structure on Google Docs at 2 a.m. They called themselves the ground floor. Not a team. Not a staff. Not employees. An alliance. People who had nothing left to prove, except that the world was wrong about them. What they were building was more than a startup. It was a counter-offensive. A blueprint for a smarter, faster, more human kind of company. One that didn't punish you for being different, but thrived because of it. And under Elena's leadership, it wasn't just collaborative. It was surgical. Every new client they landed had once been a target of Whitmore's overreach. Every solution they delivered exposed the very weaknesses Whitmore had ignored. They weren't coming for a slice of the pie. They were here to bake a whole new one, and feed every underdog who'd ever been told to sit down and be grateful. The empire had fired its future. Now the future was building its own empire. In silence. In shadows. And it was almost ready to step into the light. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. Whitmore Logistics still had its sleek glass tower downtown. Bradley Whitmore still showed up every morning in tailored suits, stepping out of a black Escalade with tinted windows and a driver who knew the drill. The press still quoted him. His LinkedIn profile still glowed with phrases like visionary and thought leader. But behind the tinted glass and polished PR, the foundation was cracking. It started small. One of their major regional clients backed out of a renewal contract. Something about wanting to explore newer, more agile partnerships. Bradley waved it off. Market noise, he said. Nothing more. But then it happened again. And again. By the end of the quarter, 6 long-standing contracts, worth over $14 million, had vanished. He called a meeting. Demanded answers. The sales team said the same thing, over and over. We're losing them to a new firm. Small but fast. Customized strategies. Better analytics. More diverse teams. Clients feel heard. Bradley scoffed. Flash in the pan, he muttered. Let them enjoy their 15 minutes. But inside, something uneasy stirred. He started hearing the name Rodriguez and Company pop up more often. In articles, in client briefings, in whispered conversations in the break room. He laughed it off. Cute little startup. Probably won't make it past tax season. But Whitmore's numbers didn't lie. For the first time in 5 years, their quarterly report was flat. No growth. No new territory. Worse, the board noticed. They weren't impressed by his recycled slogans anymore. Innovation. Efficiency. Market leadership. They wanted real answers. Bradley gave them charm. The market wanted change. Bradley gave them tradition. Internally, morale was dropping. Younger employees were leaving. Veteran managers were disengaged. The same corporate culture that once protected Bradley was now choking the company from within. And still, he didn't see it. Because men like Bradley never look down, until the floor gives out from under them. By the time he finally paid attention to Rodriguez and Company, they weren't cute anymore. They were everywhere. They were pulling in former clients like magnets. They were hiring ex-Whitmore staff like it was a movement. They were building something Bradley didn't understand. And when you don't understand something, you can't control it. So, for the first time in his career, Bradley did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He reached out. He told his assistant, "Find me a consulting firm. Quiet. Nimble. Someone who can fix this. Before the board starts sharpening knives." What he didn't know was that the firm he was about to hire was run by the woman he once fired. The boardroom smelled like expensive wood polish and quiet panic. It was Tuesday morning, 8:55 a.m. sharp. Bradley Whitmore sat at the head of the long glass table, scrolling through his tablet like a man who still believed he was in control. To his left, 3 board members. To his right, his newly hired PR lead. Across from him, 2 journalists from a logistics trade publication, there for what he called a proactive transparency initiative. He told them a transformation was coming. A bold pivot. A consulting partnership with a rising firm known for disruptive strategy and fresh vision. He even smiled when he said it, but the smile started to twitch when the doors opened. Because walking in, poised, polished, and carrying nothing but a leather folder, was Elena Rodriguez. She didn't flinch, didn't gloat. She walked straight to the front of the room, nodded once to the board, and calmly connected her laptop to the projector. Bradley blinked, sat up straighter. Elena! Her eyes didn't even flicker. Mr. Whitmore, she said coolly, thank you for inviting us to consult on your internal optimization. Bradley forced a laugh. Wait, you're with Rodriguez and Company? I am Rodriguez and Company. Dead silence. One of the board members cleared their throat. Shall we begin? Elena clicked the remote. The first slide appeared. Whitmore Logistics. Internal vulnerabilities and strategic gaps. She spoke with the calm precision of someone who had spent her nights bleeding into spreadsheets and her mornings building an empire from scratch. She didn't insult him. She didn't raise her voice. She simply laid out the facts, numbers, client losses, internal inefficiencies, supply chain weaknesses. Then she showed the audience something else. A comparative timeline. Side-by-side decisions made by Whitmore's executive leadership, and the consequences that followed. All backed by data. All verifiable. All impossible to ignore. Then came the kicker. She pulled up a proposal, the same one she'd written for Whitmore Logistics 3 years ago. The one that was rejected. Buried. This strategic framework, she said, was submitted internally by a former employee. It was dismissed. But since implementing it independently, our clients have seen an average growth of 23% per quarter. She didn't name herself. She didn't need to. Bradley stared at the screen, silent. His face, stone. But his knuckles were white on the armrest. She clicked once more. Final slide. Conclusion. Survival is optional. Adaptation is not. She turned to the room. We're prepared to help this company course correct, but only if the leadership is ready to face the root of the problem. She packed her laptop, nodded once. Thank you for your time. And just like that, she walked out. No drama. No mic drop. Just a woman reclaiming a room she never should have been forced to leave. Bradley sat frozen, the walls suddenly quieter than usual. The board was impressed. The journalists were scribbling like mad. And in that moment, Bradley finally understood. He hadn't just invited a consultant. He had invited his reckoning. Bradley should have known the boardroom meeting wasn't the end. It was just the first warning shot. A calm before a very precise, very public storm. 3 days later, the second wave hit. Not from Elena, but from her team. It began when Devin Banks, former cybersecurity manager at Whitmore and now head of systems integrity at Rodriguez and Company, dropped into a confidential Zoom with Elena and 2 of her senior analysts. His tone was sharp, focused. I cracked into the archive drive, he said. The one they said was deleted. What did you find? Elena asked. He turned his screen around and smiled. Everything. Old server backups. Auto-saved email drafts. Cached audio recordings. Even boardroom meeting notes that had been accidentally purged during Whitmore's last infrastructure upgrade. Inside those files, proof that Bradley and 2 other executives had knowingly inflated DEI numbers on their government contract applications, claiming diversity that didn't exist to qualify for tax breaks and federal logistics bids. Elena leaned forward. These are federal contracts? Devin nodded. 36 of them. Angela, now Rodriguez and Company's strategic accounts lead, joined the call. She had her own bombshell. I found language in the internal email chains between Bradley and the marketing lead, direct instructions to suppress negative Glassdoor reviews and manipulate employee surveys before quarterly reporting. That's securities fraud if they use those reports to influence investor confidence. It was worse than Elena expected. This wasn't just corporate arrogance. This was criminal. But she didn't want to leak it to the press. At least, not yet. She wanted to hold it, like a loaded file. Not for revenge. For leverage. Package the documentation, Elena said. Timestamps, digital signatures, IP addresses. Make it bulletproof. Devon nodded. Already working on it. But the real twist came a week later. Kenji, now leading Rodriguez and Company's Data Intelligence Division, had traced internal decision trees used by Whitmore's board for the past 4 years. They mirrored Elena's original strategic blueprint almost exactly. They didn't just steal your framework, he said. They've been using it ever since. Just badly. Badly enough that the data itself showed decline. Badly enough that Elena could now mathematically prove the company was bleeding out under its own stolen plans. She stared at the graphs for a long moment. This was no longer about hurt feelings or ego. This was about truth. Rodriguez and Company wasn't just a better company. It was the rightful one. And now, the public was going to see that too. Because soon, very soon, this wouldn't just be a war of spreadsheets. It would be a reckoning of integrity, and Whitmore was standing on quicksand. Bradley never saw it coming. He was too busy scrambling to cover cracks in the foundation to notice the entire building was already up for sale. While he was hosting damage control meetings and coaching PR statements, Rodriguez and Company had been executing something far more ruthless and far more elegant. A silent takeover. Elena wasn't interested in lawsuits or headlines. She didn't want chaos. She wanted control. And control doesn't come from screaming at the gates. It comes from walking through the front door with a deed in your hand. It started with Class B shareholders, the smaller ones. The quiet investors who'd never liked Bradley's leadership style but tolerated it for the returns. But when the returns stopped coming, they started looking elsewhere. Elena's team reached out. Discreetly. Professionally. With offers 15% above market value. No drama. No pressure. Just options. The one thing most shareholders rarely get. By the end of the quarter, Rodriguez and Company had acquired 22% of voting stock. By the time Bradley found out, it was too late to stop the momentum. He called an emergency board meeting. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, waving a printed stock report. "Why is Rodriguez and Company on our shareholder ledger?" Silence. Then a voice from the end of the table spoke up. It was Evelyn Marks, senior board member, and one of the few who had built her own wealth instead of inheriting it. "Because they've earned it," she said plainly. "You've lost 5 major clients in 6 months. Employee satisfaction is the lowest it's ever been. And we just got word the Department of Labor is reviewing our diversity filings." She paused, then added, "We're hemorrhaging value under your leadership." Bradley looked around the room. No one made eye contact. "Are you suggesting we—" "What?" "Hand it over to them?" "We're not handing anything over," Evelyn replied. "We're correcting the mistake you made when you let Elena Rodriguez walk out of this company." That was the moment it hit him. Not the numbers. Not the stock percentages. The truth. He hadn't just underestimated her. He'd underestimated everyone she brought with her. The data guy. The saleswoman. The whistleblowers. The outcasts. They weren't misfits. They were the future. And now they were at the helm. The following week, the paperwork was filed. A partial acquisition that put Rodriguez and Company in a controlling position of Whitmore Logistics. The company wouldn't die, but it would change hands. Leadership would be replaced. Strategy would be overhauled. And Bradley? He was offered a ceremonial title, Advisor Emeritus. No voting power. No decision-making. Just a nameplate and a final check. He declined. Of course he did. Men like Bradley don't do quiet exits. But this wasn't his story anymore. This was Elena's. She didn't storm the castle. She bought it. Room by room. Brick by brick. Until there was no kingdom left for him to rule. And the most poetic part? She did it all without raising her voice. Just numbers. Just strategy. Just truth, served cold, in boardrooms and contracts and final signatures. The empire hadn't collapsed. It had simply changed ownership. It didn't happen overnight. The fall wasn't dramatic, or loud, or viral. There were no headlines. No public breakdown. No footage of him storming out of a boardroom. It was quieter than that, and somehow crueler. Bradley Whitmore simply began to disappear. First, the media stopped calling. The The same journalists who once chased his soundbites now pursued Elena's quarterly strategies. The Forbes covers stopped. The invitations to speak at business schools dried up. Overnight, he went from the face of modern logistics to a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. Then came the personal losses. The luxury townhouse in River North? Sold. The lake house in Michigan? Repossessed. The yacht anchored in Fort Lauderdale? Gone before summer hit. Investors pulled away. Sponsors went silent. Even his country club quietly revoked his membership. Pending re-evaluation, they said. His wife filed for divorce 2 months after the buyout. Said she didn't recognize the man he'd become. The truth. She never saw him lose before. And now, she couldn't stand the sight of it. His kids stopped answering texts. His old friends stopped meeting for dinner. The world that once bent to his schedule suddenly acted like he was a burden. Bradley tried to bounce back. He reached out to startups, private firms, consulting groups. No one responded. One company sent a generic reply. We appreciate your interest but are currently seeking candidates with a proven record of ethical leadership. He read it twice, laughed once, then deleted it. By month 6, he was living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a dated building on the edge of Logan Square, furnished with whatever he hadn't sold. His mornings were quiet. His inbox empty. His world had shrunk down to 2 rooms, a flickering TV, and a pile of unopened mail. Sometimes, he scrolled LinkedIn just to feel something. That's where he saw it. Rodriguez and Company had just secured a $160 million federal contract. One he had once claimed was too ambitious to pursue. And there, in the press photo, was Elena. Same posture, same eyes. But now, the whole world finally saw what he never could. She wasn't a problem to be managed. She was a force he never should have tried to contain. And now, as Bradley sat alone on a thrift store couch, reading articles about the empire that used to be his, he understood something he'd never admit out loud. The most expensive mistake of his life was a $4.85 cup of coffee. Elena never threw a party. No champagne toast. No viral press conference. No victory speech. That wasn't her style. When the final paperwork went through, officially securing Rodriguez and Company as the new majority stakeholder of Whitmore Logistics, Elena was sitting alone in her office, barefoot, sipping lukewarm coffee, and reviewing vendor updates. There was no music playing. No crowd cheering. Just the soft hum of the city beyond her window. Because real power doesn't scream. It doesn't need a spotlight. It moves quietly, like a tide, steady, unstoppable, and impossible to reverse. That week, the company signed its largest contract to date, a $160 million federal infrastructure deal focused on supply chain modernization. The same contract Bradley once told her was out of her league. Now it had her name on it. Reporters called. TV stations asked for interviews. Magazines requested cover shoots. She turned down most of them. The only one she agreed to was a feature in Forbes Women, not for her ego, but for every girl who ever felt too loud, too smart, too different for the room she walked into. The headline read, "The Quiet Architect of a New Corporate Era." Inside, the article didn't focus on revenge. It focused on values. How Rodriguez and Company had built a new culture, where the overlooked became the leaders, where diversity wasn't a checkbox but a strategy, and where bold ideas were no longer buried, they were funded. Her team celebrated, of course. They deserved it. Angela brought in cupcakes. Devon played 90s R&B through the office speaker. Kenji made mock investor reports full of memes and inside jokes. There was laughter. There was joy. But Elena? She just stood back and smiled. This wasn't just a win. It was a correction. A realignment of what should have been from the beginning. And deep down, she didn't need the world to applaud. She had something better. Peace. Not the kind you get from walking away. The kind you earn from staying, rebuilding, and winning on your own terms. One evening, long after the office had emptied out, Elena walked past the same coffee shop where it all started. The same counter. The same barista. Even the same smell. Burnt espresso and ambition. She ordered a latte. When the cashier asked, "Will this be all?" she paused. Then slid her black company card across the counter. Actually, she said with a knowing smile, I'd like to cover the next 5 orders too, because sometimes the smallest gestures are how legacies begin. Elena's story isn't just about corporate strategy or poetic justice. It's about what happens when the world underestimates the wrong person, and how you respond when they do. Because here's the truth. You're not always going to be welcomed. You won't always be seen. And sometimes, the very people who smile at you in meetings will be the ones who quietly shut the door behind you. But that doesn't mean your value disappears. It just means you might have to build your own door. What Elena teaches us is this. You don't need revenge to win. You need results. You don't need validation to move forward. You need vision. And most importantly, you don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to keep building until they can't ignore you anymore. Let them underestimate you. Let them overlook you. Because while they're busy doubting you, you'll be doing the work. You'll be sharpening your skills. You'll be writing the plan. You'll be becoming the kind of person who doesn't just return to the table. You buy the table. The story of Elena Rodriguez reminds us that failure isn't the end. It's a pause, a redirect, a challenge that asks, how bad do you really want this? And if you answer that question with action, not anger, not noise, not desperation, but action, you'll come out the other side not just surviving, but leading. So the next time someone tells you you're too much, smile, say thank you, and get back to work. Because the best kind of success is the kind you never have to explain. He paid $4.85 for her coffee. To him, it was nothing, a quick swipe of a card. To her, it was everything, a moment burned into memory. Because that coffee wasn't charity. It was the receipt that marked the beginning of the end. He thought he was helping someone beneath him. What he didn't know was that she was already planning how to rise so far above him. He'd need a telescope to see her success. That's the thing about people like Elena. They don't announce their comeback. They don't beg for a seat at the table. They build their own table, and then send invites only to those who believed in them from the beginning. So the next time you feel overlooked, disrespected, or underestimated, remember this. You're not falling behind. You're getting ready. The world might call it silence, but you know it's strategy. And when the moment comes to walk back into the rooms that once rejected you, you won't need revenge. You'll bring results. You'll bring receipts. And they'll never forget your name again. Now, if this story lit a fire in you, if it reminded you who you are and what you're capable of, subscribe, like, share it with someone who needs this reminder. Because the world doesn't need louder noise. It needs quieter power. And your time is coming.